So in today's worship we were looking at a story that the church were following about Saul and David, and that whole episode in 1 Samuel 24 and 23, when we hear how Saul tenaciously follows David, tries to have him killed because he feels threatened by him, and David doesn't kill Saul when he has the chance, because he's waiting on what God wants to do and trusting in God's time, recognizing that Saul was God's anointed king. We contrasted that and carried on with the story of Nicodemus in John's Gospel, and talked about the idea that obviously in New Testament times we're not waiting for things to happen in God's good time in that sense, in as much as the good news of God is already here. In the birth of Jesus, God in human form, that new relationship comes. And the Old Testament language of, if you're faithful to God, everything's great, if you're not, everything's terrible, gets a little more granular and a little more real world, because for us it is the words of the Great Commandment to put God at the centre of all your life, all you do and say, that is the most important thing. And in that sense, it's important to recognise that the things that stop us from talking to God always, relying on God's strength always, will be our traditions and the things that hold us back. The good news of Jesus is pure beauty and joy and love. You look at God, you see awesomeness. Total and utter awesomeness. And in the face of that, our own strivings, our own sense of what's going right or what's going wrong, what we think is important and what we think is optional, pale. They really do pale. Because if you're confronted with that love, if you've seen and experienced that unconditional grace, then there is no other story. Everything else is seen through that lens, and that's what Saul was unable to do, to see that in David there was greatness that was there. Nicodemus couldn't see what Jesus had to offer because he was hidebound by his tradition, by his past, by his expectations. He was unable to see and recognize the truth that we all need to, that we need to be constantly ready and willing to be broken and to be remade, to stop thinking in rigid lines and to be victims of our past and prejudice and circumstance, and to be born again, to be made new constantly, because God is God and everything else isn't, and it's as simple as that. And God is love, and such love.